Very good evening. I am delighted to welcome you back to our 13th webinar, a conversation about caregiving in print and pictures. My name is Bhavana, and I'm the founder of Caregiver Saathi. Caregivers and caregiving is spoken about in a certain way in our stories and films and other stories that we hear on an ongoing basis. That has determined how caregivers and caregiving is seen, experienced, and expected. We find that as times are changing, we need to examine how some stories are heard, told, witnessed, and retold. Caregivers and caregiving is one such topic. We would like to re examine how the stories of caregivers and the stories about caregiving are told in modern times so that we can look at what this particular topic means in our current social context. We've been having this webinar series to be able to examine exactly what does care mean, how is caregiving seen, and in fact, the fact that caregivers have hitherto been invisible. Today, we have an interesting conversation, a conversation about labor of love, perspectives of professional caregivers. Over a period of time, especially in modern urban India and across the world, we've had professional caregivers, but are they really seen? We will talk about that. And before that, I would like to talk to you about Caregiver Saathi. At Caregiver Saathi, we aim to empower family caregivers by creating an ecosystem of well being and healing for the primary caregivers, especially those who are navigating terminal illness, chronic, or any other life limiting condition. We support caregivers through their caregiving journeys and beyond. I am sure you know some caregiver or the other, or you may be a caregiver. If not today, you may be one soon. So, how do we do this? We do this through awareness programs such as this. We have a helpline through which you can reach out and seek support. We have healing circles or support groups through which you can interact with other individuals on similar journeys or individuals who may have gone through such a journey and can support you. We have research through which we share curated articles, handbooks, and various other materials that are available on our very rich website. Finally, we have social media communication through which we aim to create awareness and advocacy through various platforms. We have built a variety of resources thus far. We have a tech enabled support system through a website and app, and education through online and offline programs, community sensitization through a podcast, which is Caregiver Diaries, Mantras and Communication, um, coaching, and family counseling. Caregiver coaching is unique, and we have on board 16 coaches who can provide coaching sessions for you to build emotional mastery, resilience, and endurance that caregiving journeys can demand. And of course, we have a volunteer base throughout, significantly in India, but many volunteers internationally as well, who are helping provide a variety of services, including respite care. How can you get involved? Through multiple ways. Talk to us about your caregiving journeys, be a part of our Gentle Warrior sessions, or send us your stories for our podcast on Caregiving Diaries. You can spread the word, you can volunteer with us, you can partner with us if you know of organizations or you belong to an organization that you think can partner with us. And of course, you could join us as an intern or fellow. Join us in our support groups or healing circles, help us raise funds, collaborate with us if you're an educational institution or any other organization that relates with the cause and would like to participate. join us in our research, or become a Saathi by joining some of our programs. With that, it is my absolute pleasure to enjoy the magic of social media and be introduced to the speaker for today. Neerja Deodhar is an independent writer and editor with 5 years of experience in Indian newsrooms. She's the curator and editor of the book People Called Delhi and has worked as a researcher on documentaries and nonfiction shows. Her areas of interest are art, culture, and gender. With that, I would like to welcome Neerja today. Hi, Neerja.
Hi, Bhavana. It's such an honor to be here and to be able to discuss my work. And I wanted to thank you for inviting me and also reading my article and reading it deeply and engaging with it.
It, I chanced upon that article and I'm trying to recollect. It may have been that somebody pointed me to it. It just feels
Yes,
like,
someone tagged you over there. You said that, like, someone said you were the obvious reader for a piece like this. So, yeah.
that's right. One of the things that has been happening over the last couple of years is that when somebody sees a topic like caregiving or caregivers or care, I have these lovely cheerleaders and supporters who would tag me onto that, and it was wonderful to discover you and your work. I liked your article, and I would like for you to talk about your article, and then we will talk about the journey to that article.
Okay, great. So, essentially, my article was a collection of 6 stories of different professional caregivers from across India. Now, the difference between a caregiver within the home, within the family, and a professional one is that a professional one is paid for doing this sort of care work. They're usually engaged either independently or through an agency which deals with similar professional caregivers. And the article looks at the emotional complexities of the job that they do, because this is not like most white collar jobs. It's very different in terms of the tasks it involves, the people it involves. And I also wanted to look at what the challenges of such a job were and why people were still so keen to do it. So there was, of course, my own sort of first hand witnessing of what these caregivers do, but also I'm a culture journalist at the end of the day, so I was also very interested in the contours of the profession. What does it involve? How is it different from any other profession?
Yeah.
So those are my entry points into the whole subject. And in
Hmm.
the article, I think you'll find not just stories of resilience, but also you'll come across the kind of personality that these caregivers have. You'll see certain commonalities. You'll see empathy. You'll see a kind of need to work hard. You'll see a sense of duty. So you'll also see the commonalities and the differences in their experiences. I think that is mainly what I was trying to capture. And I mean, we'll discuss this at length a little later, but also I wanted to ascribe them a certain personhood. I think a lot of people who do care work or domestic work are not seen as people, they're seen as entities within the house. And I wanted to bring out their personhood. So that was kind of the motive behind the piece.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing that because it is so integral to the work that we wish to do in terms of shining the light on the caregivers. And, there are caregivers who are professional caregivers, and then there are caregivers who are family caregivers, severely dependent on professional caregivers, increasingly so. And it is so important for us, especially from the gender lens, to be able to see and recognize caregivers. So I am curious. I'm absolutely curious that being a journalist and, you have interest. There's so many other issues around culture and gender. Why caregivers and why
Hmm.
you spoke about it briefly, but was there some kind of a personal motivation? Was
Oh, yes.
there?
There was a personal motivation. So the idea for this article came to me in 2019, and
Mm.
it's very. I think it makes a writer very keenly involved in an article or an idea or any sort of writing when they know exactly what they want to tell through the story. I remember the first paragraph of that piece was completely clear in my mind in 2019. I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and that was based on personal experiences. So, my grandfather suffered a stroke when I was a young child, and he continued to live on, and he was quite okay for a couple of years. But then after that, his condition deteriorated, which is when professional caregivers, came into our household for the first time. And I was witness to their work and their interactions with my grandfather for a couple of years. And then a few years after he passed away, my grandmother also needed professional care because she suffered from Parkinson's and also had some kind of speaking disability that she developed in her later years. It's similar to aphasia. So she also needed help. So as a consequence, I've seen caregivers at work for at least 8 years of my life, and those are very formative years of my life. And I think the one episode, and I write about it in the article as well, the one episode that has really shaped my mind is that when my grandfather passed away, he was quite I think his condition had deteriorated quite a bit, and he was more and more confined to his bed. So none of us, it's not like we didn't see it coming, but I suppose it still kind of shakes something within you. It shifts something within you when someone so close to you passes away. And I remember that the last caregiver he had was also very shaken because she'd been around for quite some time and we developed a bond together. And she was very shaken, and that is something I sort of expected because they spent so much time together. But after he was cremated and we came back from the funeral home and we were kind of settling back into our lives, she was there for us. She helped cook lunch for us. She sat with us. She ate with us. And I didn't think that that was necessary for her to do, but she did it herself. So I saw someone who was holding space for their own grief and also helping us through our grief. And I was very touched by that day and everything I saw, and that completely changed my whole perspective towards how I saw professional caregivers. um, and then of course my grandmother had her own share of caregivers, and I saw how they dealt with her because she had a tendency to be, she was a very strong-willed woman, she was very stubborn in her own ways, and I saw how they dealt with her also. So I noticed very early on then that there is something here. There is a very special group of people who have a certain aptitude to be able to do this job. The demands of their job are very different from any other job, and there is clearly something that can be documented over here. So that's where I came from. And also, see, there's another thing that I actually wanted to talk about, which is that 2 years before I wrote this article, I wrote another article on grief, specifically the kind of grief that comes with losing someone who had palliative care, who was confined to bed for a very long time. And I remember the feeling very clearly where I realized that I'd lost my grandmother in more ways than one. Before her death, a couple of years before, when she could not communicate anymore, when her ability to express emotions had reduced gradually, I realized that I'm not speaking to the same person anymore. I'm not sitting next to the same person anymore. Of course, that person still exists inside there, but that relationship fundamentally changes. And it's not because she couldn't make me my favorite food anymore or we could go out of the market anymore. It's because that personal loss of that relationship had occurred. So it was still my grandmother, but it was my grandmother in a very different form. And I think about how, in the early stages when she was losing her own personhood, she must have been aware of it because she was an incredibly intelligent woman. She knew what was happening to her. And you're in such a vulnerable state right then, right? Because you're losing control of your body and your own ability to do things. So in that moment, you need someone who will take care of you non-judgmentally, who will not erode your own sense of self through the care that they can give. And initially we thought that, the family member would be ideal for it, but of course it was not possible. So a professional had to step in and they were able to do it so beautifully. And those were the thoughts that I was sort of moving with.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad that you had a good professional member who could give you the support and you had that experience, because very often I hear that people are often not so satisfied with the level of comfort and support that they can get from professionals, because you really don't have professionals who are able to render this labor of love.
Hmm.
And that leads me to my next question. Why labor of love?
So it was a title that kind of came to me during the first draft, and it stuck through all the subsequent drafts. And I'm so lucky that my editor Meera Ganpati of the Soup also liked it. I mean,
Mm,
I sent it to her as a sort of, okay, this is the working title. You change it if you want, and she was like, no,
right,
it fits. It's perfect.
right.
So to me, there are two operative words here. The first is love, I think, and that is something that anybody who is a caregiver themselves to someone
Mm,
at home will also associate with. That it is
mm,
ultimately an act of extreme empathy, kindness,
mm,
understanding, and a lot of these caregivers who spoke to me spoke like described it in terms of a duty or a calling. They also saw it as a profession, but they always said that the person I'm dealing with is like family to me. I consider them family, therefore I consider their care as being a priority to me. So there was a sense of, describing it as a duty. They never called it
mm.
that calm. They referred to it as like whatever the local word for duty was. So to me,
What
the
was the word?
labor part of it is significant for that reason. And the
What's the
labor part of
local
it,
word?
I think this is something that is something that I'm sure you've also spoken about before. We don't see care work for the work it is. We don't see it for the labor it is. We
Yeah.
don't ascribe it the same quality that we would professional work. And this is true also of domestic work. This is why so many women end up becoming caregivers disproportionately, whether the person in need of care is from their own family, or it is the in-laws family, or any other family that they may be associated with. And it's because we don't want to recognize it as work. Society doesn't see it as work. And I was very interested in, why does this work become invisible? Why do we not see it as work? Why do we see it as a sort of chore that can be just sort of taken care of? And what I realized is this inherently linked to who you're caring for. Any person who is chronically ill or aging within the household is not a contributing member. They don't add to the household's income. They are not necessarily taking decisions in a way that fundamentally change the household. They are seen as someone who constantly needs support. A lot of families also view them as burdens. And the caregivers were very frank and honest in telling me this, that they do see them, the families do see them as burdens sometimes. They don't see them as a family member who just happens to not participate in the family like they used to, which I think is how they should be viewed. And the moment this becomes someone who is confined to a room or a part of the house, you only visit them once or twice in a day to make sure they're okay, or worse, you see them in a negative light. Anybody
Mm.
who's taking care of this person also becomes marginalized and invisible by extension. It is someone assigned to do a chore. It's not someone who's necessarily seen as taking care and keeping alive a significant family member.
Yeah. No, I think there's a voice. I don't know what that is. Um, I'll just wait for that to pass, because this looks like some technical glitch. Okay, so let's just see. Um, all right, now I labor of love is one way of saying, but in there's this whole world of feminist economists who have been making the case for saying that uh, a lot of the unpaid or care related work is simply not accounted for in economics and in the understanding of GDP of a country and so on and so forth. And therefore, in the capitalist world that we live in, it's just not accounted for. There is a lot of literature around emotional labor. We just don't know how to value it. And, that reflects into everything else and how it is seen. If everything has to be measured by the money value that you want to ascribe to it, uh, then I suppose we become victims of that. that thought process. Um, Whereas, you were interviewing some of these people, what were the challenges that you
Hmm.
saw among the professional caregivers?
Hmm. So I think it's very interesting that you brought up this whole ascribing of money things and how
Yeah,
much money you generate versus how much money you use up. And we think of everything in very transactional terms. There's an
right.
interesting dichotomy that exists in the work of caregivers. So a lot
Mm,
of them are quite criminally underpaid for the amount, a significant amount of work that they put in. And
yeah,
their work is not seen as important or it's seen as replaceable. They're easily replaceable, right? Because there are so many agencies and because their labor is so easily available to us,
yeah, yeah,
they're seen as replaceable, but at the same time, their work itself can sometimes be so complex. I was
right.
speaking to this one helper who was telling me about how she had to feed someone through a stomach tube. And this had
Mm,
to be done about 5 or 6 times a day because this elder could not eat 3 square meals. They had to be fed about 6 times a day. So she would spend that many hours just slowly feeding the person, or any other kind of ailment that the person may have that needs a very specific kind of care. So
yeah,
in some cases the agencies equip them with these skills. Sometimes they have to learn it from like the family doctor or whatever doctor the family is kind of
yeah.
going to. So sometimes it's just the very task that it involves. Sometimes it is the physical labor. So a lot of people in my interviews also told me that the physical labor is what makes it a little difficult, but also these are you people who are used to hard labor, like the actual hard work that it involves. So over time, that is something that they have managed to overcome. Then there is moment to moment care, I think, and that is something that anybody who's been a caregiver at home for anybody will know. Anybody with any sort of serious ailment or disease, or anybody who's even aging, requires moment to moment care sometimes. So that comes with its own sort of um, difficulties.
So
And
let's speak a little more about moment to moment care.
so, if it is someone who has a motor disability, or if they have an ailment which doesn't allow them to speak or to express themselves, and if they are someone who also has a mental health issue, they may need the caregiver to constantly be with them because they're afraid of being alone, or they can't communicate with other people, so they can't call out for help effectively. So it needs to be someone within the same room as the receiver of care so that they can easily draw their attention and tell them there is something wrong with me or I'm not feeling okay.
Mm,
Sometimes moment to moment care is also because of the sheer amount of food or medicines or any other sort of, there are a lot of people who also require physiotherapy. There are a lot of people who require help with going to the bathroom. There are people who require help with the simplest of tasks. They can't take a tablet by themselves. So effectively, the caregiver is constantly working for a very long period of time. They probably only take a break to have lunch or to have a cup of tea or to maybe, nap for a little bit. But yeah, more, otherwise, it can very often be moment to moment care.
mm. So we spoke briefly about what makes professional caregivers or even family caregivers invisible and marginalized in this. I am fascinated, right? In this world where making money is such an important thing, and the
Hmm.
amount of money that you make directly informs your self worth. Why do some people get into this and call it their calling?
Hmm. Okay. So I think that with a lot of people who do domestic work or care work, it is assumed that they are doing this work because they cannot get another job,
Hmm.
which I won't deny is true of some people. There was one person who's a college student and is doing this to be able to earn money so that, ultimately she can go to college and do her MA. Then there is someone who took up this job because they realized that they have the aptitude for it and also it is a better source of income than what they were previously doing. So, of
Right.
course, there is a sort of monetary factor here, but I think when I was talking about the calling or the kind of sense of duty, I'm also speaking of individuals who have viewed it as their career. Unfortunately, our understanding of careers is very limited to white collar jobs and to corporate jobs which are considered professional. And we
Mm,
don't see other kinds of skilled labor as also being careers. So, for example, Nivekha in my essay has a degree in nursing and care. And that is
right.
what she wants to do with her life. And her family is extremely supportive of it because they see it as a great profession. Or
Mm.
you have Asanar from Kerala, who saw his own father being mistreated in his end of life years, and Asana felt that if he was around or if someone else was around to adequately take care of the father would have just had a more peaceful, more comfortable life. But he was
Mm.
deprived of this because there was nobody actively taking care of him. So then
Mm.
Asana decides that I couldn't help my father, but I can help other people.
Mm.
To me, that is a very clear definition of what a career or what a life's calling is.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, yeah, are people able to articulate that this is what I want to dedicate my life to? Like, this is the purpose of my life, and this is my calling, and this is what, in your experience, also gives them the edge over someone who is doing it just as work.
Hmm. I think perhaps it does. But
Mm.
when I was doing interviews and I talk about, like, I keep drawing their attention again and again to the challenges of their job, because that to me was like kind of the crux of the story. So I constantly be like, okay, but can you tell me what the challenges of your job are? Can you tell me what a day in your life looks like? And then I'd be
Mm.
like, oh, but doing this must be so difficult, or doing this must be so heartbreaking for you. And they'd all be
Mm.
like, no, but ultimately I'm taking care of someone,
Mm.
and that to me itself is gratifying. The fact
Mm.
that someone is having a better time, the fact that someone is more comfortable because of me, to me
Mm.
is like a significant thing. So whether they got into it by accident or they got into it very with a lot of intention, that is sort of a commonality. And the thing is also that I think there's a certain bias with writing a piece like this, right? Like someone who was terribly awful at their job would not be recommended to me in the first place. I wouldn't have come across someone like that to begin with. And I
Yeah.
know that there can be caregivers who are also not great at their jobs, because ultimately we're human beings, right? There's always going to be a certain section of people who are not adequately great at their job. But from the people I spoke to, that emotional payoff was a big thing. And perhaps also it has to do with Indian and Southeast Asian cultures, and the fact that we're collectivist cultures who are very involved in the taking care of other people, especially elders. Like there is this sense of respect and this sense of love that is already ascribed to someone who's aging.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people, that sense of duty came from, oh, I'm caring for an individual who's aging. They
Yeah.
deserve this.
Yeah.
So one of my subjects, Vikas, talks about this. I'm so sorry. Vikas talks about this. Vikas says that he saw in pop culture and in his life in general that elder care was severely lacking in India, in the sense that people were not interested in taking care of older people in their families, and he wanted to kind of be that bridge. So sometimes it's as direct as that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I wanted you to hold that statement of perhaps in a collectivist culture uh, as a hypothesis, because as I interact with many people across the world, I find that, actually caregiving is found all over the world.
Hmm.
And it just tends to be driven by a whole lot of factors,
Hmm.
but fundamentally caring for elders, caring for spouses for years, and children is their world over. And of course, there are some social dynamics that make it easier or difficult. Um,
No, I completely understand, and it's very much like what I've heard. So I
mm,
think I was going off on, I think it was Nivekha, it was Asanar, it was also Vikas, who, I mean, these are people from different parts of India, right? But they're more or less articulating a very similar sentiment that maybe not all of us are aware of, which is that
right.
elders in society deserve to be taken care of.
So fair enough.
Hmm.
I also think there is merit in what you're saying, because there is a very interesting phrase in the Indian culture. Let's just say that, which is कि चढ़ते सूरज को सब सलाम करते हैं. Right? So there is a thing about the coming, the future, the where the future is to look forward to, and there is a certain quality of acceptance of what is declining or passing.
Hmm.
But that has its own issues now
Hmm.
with longer lives and
Hmm.
everything else. I mean, we do need the wisdom and the expertise of the older lot as well.
Hmm.
But great point. And I, you know, what were some of the issues that can be there when you're a professional in someone's homes, and
Hmm.
what do they have to say about dealing with other people besides the patient?
Hmm. Okay. So this is a whole different aspect of their lives that they have to sort of manage, and some of them are because they're the sort of people who are very easily likable. Those people generally have an easier time of it. There are some people who have their own personality quirks, like all of
Yeah,
us do. Some colleagues are easier to get along with at work, some are not so easy to get along with at
yeah,
work.
yeah,
I think one of the main barriers to like having a good time at a workplace for these people is getting over that sense of mistrust. So some people are generally mistrusting of others,
yeah.
outsiders in their own home, which means
Right.
that that's a huge hurdle because you have to convince the other person that you're adequately taking care of their family member, possibly their parent or their grandparent. And it
Mm,
takes them some time to kind of earn the trust of the family member. There are some people who find that their employers are extremely like they are very obsessed with micromanaging them and saying, my parent used to enjoy this for like breakfast or lunch, so you must make it exactly like this or they won't eat it. And there is no scope for the caregiver to bring their own expertise or their own aptitude to this environment because the employer is too obsessed with just telling them how to do their jobs. Then I think a lot of us in our careers use intuition, right? As a
yeah.
sort of just a way of functioning. Of course, we do use our skills and expertise and everything else that we have come prepared for. But most of us also go with intuition to a certain extent. It's very difficult, I think, for caregivers to exercise any sort of intuition in the workplace unless there is trust.
That's right.
And also, I mean, here I'm not going to be biased. I'm going to be very open when I say this that sometimes the caregiver's bias is not a substitute for science or medicine.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of conflict points that can occur where a caregiver might want to move with intuition, but the science says otherwise or the medicine says otherwise. In other cases, the caregiver's intuition may be correct. They may be hinting at something that is wrong or right, but the employer just doesn't put that sort of trust in them to be able to do their jobs.
Mm,
And
mm,
then, of course, there is how are you treated? Are you treated as an extension of the family? Are you treated as someone who works in this house so you deserve a certain amount of respect? You deserve a certain amount of space? Are you going to be welcomed as someone within the house or are you going to be treated as an entity who just comes, does their work, and leaves? So, interestingly, I found that it was in extremes. Either the person was completely mistrusted and then removed from their job, or the person, the employer would place complete trust into that person's hands, even say that you're doing a better job of caretaking than I ever would. And
mm,
for a lot of these caregivers, I mean, this is where you're spending half your day, right? Sometimes more than half your day. So if
yeah.
you don't feel comfortable, that's really going to take a toll on your own mental health. So a lot of the caregivers spoke to me about how they found a second home in a stranger's house. So this, as a culture writer, this was one of the things that interested me, which is that a lot of these people move states or even move cities to be able to do the work of caregiving. They go very far away from their family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is that sense of responsibility also, right? Because ultimately, you're earning money.
Yeah.
This is about the money you're going to send home. So you're looking looking for the welfare of like your own family, but you're going so far away from them and you're going to someone else's family and you're doing that essential care work that maybe you wanted to do for your own family for a stranger's family. But I'd bring up this stranger word and all of them denied it. They were all like, no, I don't think of this person as a stranger. I spent so much time with them. I know them inside and out. This is not a stranger to me. So they all
Yeah.
rejected that word actually.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. And I have to say that, as a young working professional mother, for me, when I was hiring help, it used to always intrigue me. How can I hire another young mother? I mean, really like that. That seems wrong. That just seems wrong. Though, of course, many people could justify it by saying, but you're providing employment, you're probably giving them access to money and education like this. But it is deployment of somebody's emotional labor or labor of love. And I used to have this absolutely beautiful woman who used to help me look after my daughter. Um, and gosh, I wouldn't have been able to bring her up. But she used to spend time away from her family to help me bring up my daughter. And I was just thinking about that, and I was also, as you were speaking, thinking that there is power play, right? Because there is an employer-employee relationship.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
onus of winning the trust is on the professional caregiver,
Hmm.
unfairly so, because trust is a mutual thing,
Hmm.
and yet it is the care worker who has to earn the trust.
Hmm.
um, and I really wish for a world where we would honor and recognize that it is a mutual trust, and that
Hmm. Hmm.
the power play or the hierarchy is is not so.
Funnily enough, I mean, they will not say this at the workplace, but they did say it to me when I was interviewing them. They also have judgments of the family members themselves. So, for example, Vikas was telling me how it was very disturbing for him that when the person in his care passed away, the family members were unwilling to touch the body or to be near it. I think they were all spooked out a little bit, which is also a natural response to someone dying. I mean, you can go catatonic and you can not want to be in that presence because it's too painful to you or something. But he was very moved by what he saw, and he was like, "This is not okay. This is not fine. This is a reaction that I did not expect." And many of those people are also cognizant of, am I here because the employer is unable to take care of the patient or the client? Am I here because they want someone to better take care of the client, or are they abdicating responsibility? So they do observe these things, and they know exactly why they're there also.
Well, I'm so glad. I'm relieved at some level that they have a voice and they have eyes and they are able to make some of these distinctions. It is so important that, because otherwise it would be so hard for us to bring about some sanity in the care related work. Um, did you find that there are some emotional skill sets or you know some competencies that caregivers need to be
Hmm.
equipped with
Hmm.
prior to, rather than learning on the job?
Hmm. 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 Okay. So here I want to tell the story of Rajeshri. So Rajeshri, before she became a professional caregiver, was sort of supporting her husband who had a health issue, and she was there for
Mm,
him in the hospital. She was there for him at home.
mm,
They had children around, like their children were grown ups with their own nuclear families, so the children couldn't really contribute to the care of the father. So she was taking care of her husband herself, and this she said by herself, she said that she has this sense of knowing when someone is in need of something, and that is why she was able to take care of her husband really well. Like she had that intuitive sense that he's struggling with this, I need to help him, but I need to know how to smartly do it also without undermining him. And she says that that is the skill that she carried forward in her caretaking. So she was assigned to someone who used to be a really independent woman with, like, her own income. She supported her family. She took care of her son, raised him basically. And Rajeshri realized that that is the context that she was coming into. That now this person, because of their aging and they've had health complications, they don't have the kind of motor skills that they used to. So someone who is completely responsible for themselves and extremely independent is now heavily dependent on me.
Yeah.
I cannot make her feel like she is less in any way. I cannot make her feel like she is so dependent on me that her life cannot carry on without me. And she modified her behavior to be able to suit this environment.
Wow.
So, this to me is a mix of empathy. It's also kindness to a certain extent. It's also knowing where to draw the line, between offering help and also making it seem obvious that, oh, you would not be able to go to the bathroom without me. And to be able to do that requires so much EQ, like so much
Yeah.
emotional strength.
Exactly. I was about to say that this is such a beautiful example of emotional intelligence, right?
But there's a downside to all of these things, and that is also, I mean, I know it can seem a little like voyeuristic, but as a culture journalist, I was super interested in, which is that there is a dichotomy to this.
Hmm.
When I was visiting my grandmother when she was aging, I found it beyond about 15-20 minutes, half an hour. I found it difficult to see her in that state because she was very clearly struggling, especially when
Mm.
she developed the speech impediment. She wanted to say so many things. She wants to talk to us. She was a talkative person. She enjoyed like sharing her opinions with us, and she couldn't. And I could see her visibly struggle with that. So, I used to go talk to her and she used to respond in, non-verbal ways to a certain extent, verbal to the extent that she could. But I could tell that she was very upset with herself for this situation that she found herself in. And to me, that was very painful, to watch and to just kind of participate in also. And I think you need a great reserve of emotional strength to be able to do this work day in, day out.
Yeah, that's right.
Because so many, like Asanar told me that he was looking after someone, and Asanar is someone who has like some 20 years of experience as a caregiver. So he
Wow.
has seen a lot of people. And Asanar was telling me that to this day, if the elder person in his care does not eat, he notices that his appetite shrinks. So there is a downside, and I do think that emotional burnout is very much a reality of their lives. They do get very moved by what they see. Or, Nivekha, for example, am I audible?
You are.
Okay. So Nivekha was telling me about how she had to feed someone through a stomach tube, right? And this is someone who had just emerged out of surgery. So
Mm.
this person wanted to eat. They wanted to eat their favorite food and they wanted to consume it like we normally do. But
Mm.
unfortunately, all the doctor allowed this person was a stomach tube. So Nivekha had to feed her through that stomach tube while this person was so upset with their life because they couldn't eat like a normal person.
Yeah.
And Nivekha had to sort of balance that and tell herself, okay, I have to be empathetic, I have to be understanding of this person, but I also have to do my job, which is a complex task.
Yeah. Sometimes we just kind of don't give it that kind of attention. And I am so delighted that, someone like you has gone to so much detail with so much insight and looked at this because certainly this profession has not gotten its due. We just take it for granted. We think that somebody who comes from socioeconomic strata, lower socioeconomic strata, could just be delegated this job, or the women, women are great at this, women can do it. But I know for sure that if I had to do something like this, it would be so hard. It would be so hard. Not just because I have not learned it, but because our personality types are also different, right? In so many cases, we just don't account for women's personality types, but this
Yeah.
just becomes their job. So, if you were to dream of a world for professional caregivers,
Hmm.
and if you were to say that, let's just prepare because we will need a large number of professional
Yes.
caregivers in the coming months, years, etc., and we just don't have them. So, talk about it in two parts. One, what do you think we can do to prepare many more professional caregivers?
Hmm.
What should they,
Hmm.
how can they be well prepared?
Hmm.
And then what's your dream for their workplaces?
Hmm. It's a very interesting question. So I think that you're very right. I feel like personality differences are very real and they do exist. And
Mm.
I also think that at a person to person level, I also mean taking care of your spouse, taking care of your child, or whoever else in the household. There are some people who are better at it, and there are some people who just because of their personalities aren't.
Mm.
So I do think that that does show up in the stories that are also documented. There were a
Right.
lot of people who were like, I can't get other work, so I'm doing this, and I don't particularly enjoy it, but I do a
Mm.
decent job of it,
Yeah.
you know? So that
Yeah.
kind of internal sort of realization does exist. Now, about how can we better train them, I feel like there needs to be more robust training of the actual medical processes they have to go through. And
Mm-hmm.
there needs to be some I do think agencies do this to a certain extent, because a lot of the caregivers that we did have within our own house also were trained in very simple things like how to help someone go to the bathroom,
Right.
or if there's a doctor visiting or if there is a lab technician visiting, how to aid them a little better,
Right.
how to help someone take their medicines,
Right.
especially someone who may not find swallowing easy. How to
Right.
feed someone, because there's a certain etiquette with that also. It's not the same as feeding a child or someone who's tired.
Yeah.
So I think equipping them with those skills, making sure that they're putting the client's comfort first and center,
Mm-hmm.
is something that maybe that can be taught. I also think I don't know if this is something that can be trained, but emotional resilience, I think, like a lot of these people, I'm imagining that if they could speak to a counselor, like a counselor at Caregiver Saathi or someone, and if there was someone to explain to them that, when this person dies, you will be in shock, you will be in grief. That
Yeah.
week will be difficult for you, and you should expect it. You should move with the understanding that this is going to happen. And not only is it a loss of someone who you grew close to, but it's also a loss of livelihood. So I think it's that double-sided sort of impact on the person. Or telling them about how you can get emotional burnout simply by seeing someone suffer because of a
That's right.
physical ailment. If we had someone to build the resilience on these emotional lines, maybe they would have an easier time of doing their work. And
Right.
now when it comes to the workplace, now this is it's very person to person. And to be honest, I mean, ultimately I found these caregivers through the people who employed them. I thought that that
Yeah.
was a good way to kind of find people with interesting stories.
Yeah.
And a lot of the caregivers employers were very honest and frank about the fact that this is a good person, we've had bad people before, or
Yeah.
this person is more understanding of my parent or grandparent, the other people were only there to do their jobs. So I feel like if there was a way to kind of clearly communicate when something went wrong or when something was not done to either person's satisfaction, it could be both, it could be the caregiver or the employer. If there is a clearer channel of communication where things are not taken personally, or it's not seen as a personal affront, or it doesn't turn into a matter of trust or mistrust, in the same way that if I was your employee and if I did something that was a 4 on 5, you would tell me, hey, you did the job well, but you could have done this better. And within us it would be a very transparent kind of communication, because ultimately it's work to us, but this person's work is taking care of another human being, someone who's close to someone else, someone who's loved by someone else. So of course things become personal. The whole point of writing this essay was to talk about how the personal and professional are completely blurred, like the difference is completely blurred, for people in this job. So I feel like there has to be a better way of communicating. And maybe if what the caregiver can expect in the household is better defined, because a lot of them told me that they ultimately become in charge of cooking food for the household. Now that is something they may not enjoy, or that is something that they might like to do. Or if the caregiver wants to do something that is radically different from how the family expects it to be, is there a way we can communicate this? So overall I think that communication channel needs to be a little better, and of course better payment, and like payment that is on fair terms. I think a lot of caregivers do suffer from not being able to ask for better wages. And I saw that primarily in COVID, because during COVID, it's possible that, the family wants one specific caregiver to take care of their family member the whole while.
Hmm.
So, how do you negotiate wages in that case? Or if the caregiver gets COVID or some other sort of disease because of the family members in general, are they taken care of? Are they sent back home? What happens in that case? So these things are very much undefined because it's an informal economy, right? The only kind of formality that exists is the agent who puts you in touch with the caregiver.
That's right.
So, and I think there is a need to kind of formalize it a little bit, or put in some rules into play, because as more and more people who have white collar jobs, who work in corporate India, who are part of this ecosystem, are growing older, their parents are also aging. I think we're going to see a much larger demand for professional caregivers in the years to come.
That's absolutely right. And I am resonating with every word that you're saying. And I am so glad that you sharpened your lens on this very, very invisible topic. Um, as you wrote about it, and as your piece was read and reflected on, what was your journey? What was your personal journey?
Hmm. Okay, so I found speaking to these people very illuminating. I
Hmm.
think because it really expanded the definition of what we perceive as a career or a calling. Most people in the creative industry that I work in also see their work as a calling. They also see it as, like, it's an artist's way. It's what I was made to do. It was what I want to do with my life. I want to tell stories. I want to be able to photograph people, whatever it is. And I think our definitions of what a career is, what a profession is, what I'm supposed to do with my life are very couched in terms that are only meant for a certain section of the population, which is the privileged in society. What we don't realize is that every sort of job brings with it certain complexities, certain issues, and it needs so much skill and so much training, and that is outside of, like, corporate India. That also exists for other jobs, but we don't see it that way, unfortunately. The other thing I think that was very significant to me was that these people like talking about their experiences. I don't think anybody talks to them. Like, if after a client passes away, or if they stop talking to a client, or if they stop working at a certain person's house, if they were allowed to do a debrief, I think their own mental strength would be a lot better. I don't know if aside from their family and friends, they're able to talk to people who understand what they're going through. Because there was one person, Rajeshri, was telling me about how the stakes of their job can sometimes be sky high. She was at home with the elder person in her care who had to be rushed to hospital because she developed some condition,
Oh.
and the other family member involved couldn't come immediately. So it was Rajeshri's personal responsibility to ensure that that person reaches hospital. And that's obviously going to take a toll on you, right? But she told this story without any, like, remorse or anger. Absolutely no remorse or anger. And that sort of self-soothing, or that sort of helping yourself through a stressful episode, they must be doing it themselves. So I think maybe they need to talk to people who do similar work. That was one of the realizations I had. The last realization I had, which is of course my favorite, is the way that people resonated with the story. I think a lot of people are not comfortable talking about the more painful parts of their lives, which is seeing a grandparent age, seeing a grandparent pass away, seeing a parent develop a condition that has, drastically changed their life or limited their life in some way. But there were so many people who reached out to me to talk about how they felt when they read that essay, because they could see their own grandparent and caregiver who is in charge of the grandparent in action. So that was very touching to me. And they were articulating the same thing that I felt because of that first caretaker who took care of my granddad, which is that, it could be something as simple as one person was telling me about how the caregiver insists on putting an array of watches that the grandfather used to own when he was, like, working and stuff. And she offers them up to him, and she's like, which one do you want to wear today? Or, she takes the care to kind of comb his hair and make him look good. And these are things that only someone who pays that attention to detail and nuance will do. And ultimately, it makes both the family member really happy, because they can see that even with a chronic disease or an illness, or while they're aging, the family members still kind of, they're enjoying their life, whatever's left of it. And also the receiver of care in question knows that their personhood is not being compromised. They're not being seen as less of who they are. So that was very touching to me.
Well, clearly, this particular experience and this writing and your insights and the effort that you've put in is absolutely precious and valuable to us at Caregiver Saathi, because we do wish for not just family caregivers but also professional caregivers to find their community. And I'm going to use this opportunity of your writing to be able to reach out. I am very aware that we are speaking in English. We are probably reaching out to a set of people, but there will be care workers and family members who hire care workers to know that they can join the community on our platform. Also, that we hope to be able to reach out to professional caregivers. Uh, Currently, those who may be comfortable in English and digital platforms, but hopefully through our outreach programs to all kinds of care workers, and offer them exactly what you recommended. Not just a community, not just mental health support, but also career opportunities, transition support, and anything else that they might need, because care work needs to be dignified and needs to be valued for what it really is. Um, it's certainly currently not at that place.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I have to say that, there are so many things that you think of when you're writing the article. And of course, you can't include everything because there's a certain structure, there's a certain style in mind. And you have 100 thoughts, but you have to whittle them down to the 30 that will make sense for that particular context. And it gave me a lot to think about. And even right now, I really enjoyed speaking to you.
I am so glad. It's good to find people who are thinking about similar things, have an exchange, and build the community and reach out. I hope that you will, and your networks will recognize, and will help spread the word, because we do need to be able to reach out. I am so grateful for you, and glad that we connected and had this lovely evening today.
Speaking as friends, as you said.
Exactly. I look forward to be able to meet you in person, and hopefully build this body of work a little further.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
So thank you, Neerja,
Thank you.
and thank you to all of you who may have joined us online right now, or who may be watching this at another point in time. Please feel free to reach out to us at Caregiver Saathi, caregiversaathi.co.in, and access all the content and resources that are available on our website, and all the services that are available to you as well. And should you need any clarifications, reach out. We have a helpline. Thank you. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.